Welcome again to another Intro to Philosophy lecture. Um, I'm glad that you can make it. I hope that everyone is doing well, feeling well, staying healthy, and all of the above. Um, so for this week, we're kind of moving on a little bit, still staying within epistemology, but instead of looking at what is knowledge, we're looking at what we are capable of knowing. So the big question is, can we know the external world? Can I know that this pen is in front of me? Can I know that I just got a text message? Can I know that trees exist or anything like that? That may sound silly to question, but hopefully, as we'll see today, through Descartes' approach, once you have a reason or understanding of how you can know certain things, then you're able to build upon this foundation for knowledge. If you never have any reason for why you think that basic things are the way they are, then it's going to be harder to build reasons for why more complicated things exist, or stuff like that. So we're going to be focusing on Descartes today, and the next time we'll focus on Hume. But just to start out, we'll just kind of go through how the book starts this section of considering this hypothesis that I've mentioned before, that your entire life is a really extremely vivid dream. Or, there's so many different, examples of this. It could be the Matrix thing, or a brain in a vat, or a dream. Anything, really. So just consider that you have just been dreaming up every experience that you've ever had. That you actually didn't go to work today, or you actually aren't watching this lecture right now. Imagine that all of that is false. I'm sure at some point in your life, whether you were like, you hit 13 years old and then had this massive question of, how do I know that I exist? Maybe not everybody has that question, but I think a lot of people do. I remember being like a teenager and that being like the big, deep question, like, whoa, how can you even imagine that? That's so deep. And so some of it is just silly, but it is, it's something to consider at some point in your life. So how the book calls this the android hypothesis. How do you know that the android hypothesis is false? Unfortunately, it's actually kind of hard to know that the android hypothesis is false. Because if you can't know that the android hypothesis is false, then you know nothing about the external world. So if I don't have an argument for how I know that I'm actually experiencing life right now and everything is real, if I don't have an argument for that, or if I can't know that 100%, then I can't know anything else. If I can't know that I exist, then I can't know that I'm married to my husband, or I can't know that I have 2 dogs, or whatever it may be. Everything that you believe probably is based on certain beliefs, but this is one of the most basic beliefs. We talked about basic beliefs earlier. Most people are operating under the understanding that they do exist and that the external world does exist. So it's important to know, how can we show or demonstrate that the external world actually exists? Because pretty much every human is operating under that assumption. So if it's wrong, then that's really bad. You could just think it doesn't matter because you're going to live the same way either way, which I think is valid. But it's worth diving into. And there's some really interesting arguments as well. So, external world skepticism is basically that you can't know the external world around you at all, because you can't prove that you're not a brain in a vat, or that you're not having this really extended, vivid dream. So, a skeptic about some subject matter is someone who denies that we have knowledge about that subject matter. So an external world skeptic would be somebody who denies that we have knowledge about the external world. And as we'll get to know, David Hume was actually kind of an external world skeptic. But he didn't act like one. So, I mean, he didn't live life as though he didn't know anything. So a skeptical hypothesis is a hypothesis according to which the world is different from how you take it to be. So it would be having the understanding that what you see around you isn't actually what's going on. One of those would be like the android argument, and the Earth never existing. And then another famous one is Descartes' demon argument, which we'll talk about, or a brain in a vat argument. All of those are examples of skeptical hypotheses. So, and these are all global skeptical hypotheses. So it's true, if they're true, then pretty much nothing that you take yourself to know about the external world is true. So it deals with the entirety of everything that exists. But you can have skeptical beliefs that are smaller than that. They don't always have to be global. And we won't really get into that, but one skeptical hypothesis argument is this, that premise 1, if you know P, then you can know that the skeptical hypothesis is false. Second premise, you can't know that the skeptical hypothesis is false. So third premise, you don't know P. So you could substitute P with like anything. If you know that you're holding a pen right now, then you can know that the skeptical hypothesis is false, because you know that there is an external world around you. You're holding a pen in the external world. So if you know that you're holding a pen, then you can know that the skeptical hypothesis is false. But premise 2, you can't know that the skeptical hypothesis is false. So there's no way of knowing that. So because of that, you don't actually know that you're holding a pen right now. And this form of argument is called modus tollens. So I'm not like super big on logic, but it is helpful to know. Modus tollens is basically when you have first premise, call it P. First premise, call it if P, then Q. Second premise, call it not Q. So conclusion, not P. I should write that. That might help. So modus tollens is kind of like, it's almost like working backwards. There's modus tollens and modus ponens. Modus tollens and modus ponens. So modus tollens, and this is helpful for any argument that you make. So if P, then Q. You can substitute P and Q for anything. 2, not Q. So 3, your conclusion would be not P. So you could say, if fish have gills, then I'm totally making this up. This is not a valid argument. Sorry, it's going to be valid. It's not going to be sound. If a fish has gills, then it can swim. It can't swim, so it doesn't have gills. That's just a silly example. Then you have modus ponens, which is 1 if P then Q, 2 P, so conclusion Q. So that could be if fish have gills, then fish can swim. Fish have gills, so fish can swim. That would be modus ponens. Those are just simple logical formulations of arguments. Good to know, but I don't care that much about logic, so. It's important. It's just not my wheelhouse. I don't love it. But it is important. So, let's see. So if P entails Q and you know P, then you are in a position to know Q. That is kind of... So people can use arguments like this to demonstrate that the external world exists or that it doesn't. And you can have an argument that fits the form of modus ponens or modus tollens, and it can still be wrong if you have false premises. It can be a valid argument because it logically follows, the conclusion logically follows from the premises, but it's not sound because they're false premises. So that's the difference between validity and soundness. Just good to know. All right. So we'll go into depth about Hume next time, so I'm not really going to touch on him today. So Descartes is our big guy today. That's who we're focusing on. So super famous in philosophy. He's from the modern period, so remember that's not contemporary. It's actually more like the 1500s, 1600s, 1700s. So Descartes is known as the first modern philosopher, pretty much. His name is René Descartes. And he has a soft spot in my heart because he was one of the first philosophers that I was like, that's really interesting. So I like him. He doesn't have to be right about everything, but I do like him a lot. So he was born in 1596, died 1650. He's French. You don't really need to know that. French, but spent 20 years in Holland, so he's also... Is Holland Dutch? Oh gosh. What's Holland? I think it might be Dutch. Does it say in the book? It doesn't. It doesn't matter. So this is 17th century philosophy. This is when the modern era started, pretty much. So before Descartes, you had medieval philosophy. So Aquinas and scholasticism was right before the modern era. So I mentioned this briefly, I think, like one of the first classes, but what characterized scholasticism was like very technical writing that was absent of I, or it was just absent of personal pronouns and personal thoughts. It was really logical, and it was not narrative at all. So it was basically giving proofs for statements. So Aquinas would write, God exists, and then write like a billion different proofs for how that works. It was almost like geometrical proofs. So Descartes comes on the scene and he does things pretty differently. If you read this, which hopefully you did, you see that this is not like technical writing. Like the first sentence is, some years ago, I was struck by the large number of falsehoods that I had accepted as true in my childhood. That is very narrative. That is personal. All these characteristics that don't match with scholastic philosophy, which is partly why what accounts for this big shift, or what accounts for modern philosophy starting at this point, is because there was such a huge shift in the writing. And people followed his lead. After Descartes, people talked about their personal experiences a lot more. And it shifted with the Enlightenment. Everything changes. But for a while, this was the style that people wrote in. He was Catholic, as most people were at the time. And he had to be careful because philosophers got in a lot of trouble around this time. Because if they said anything that was different than the church at the time, then they could get arrested, they could get excommunicated. There was a lot of bad things that could happen. Did I say executed? I hope I didn't say executed. I don't think they'd get executed. Just excommunicated. They would get in trouble. But I don't think they would get murdered. Maybe. I'm not sure. I guess it happened occasionally. So Descartes, while he seems to, I don't know, but seems to be a Christian and to hold the Catholic view throughout all of his writing, he was much different than what the church was arguing for. And the church kind of really didn't like him at some points. Because he starts his argument by doubting, he doesn't start in the first meditation, he doubts the existence of God, which is taboo for the time. Not good. And he does this with the intent of building back the foundation of knowledge so that he can have reason to believe in God. But just the fact that he said it's doubtable, he got in trouble with the church. So one thing about modern philosophy, one way that people characterize it is by distinguishing rationalists from empiricists. Rationalists believe that you can have knowledge that is a priori. So before experience, you can have knowledge. So you could be without a body, a physical body, and without physical material experiences, and you could still have knowledge. So if you have a brain, you can have knowledge. For empiricists, experience is necessary for knowledge. So you can only know things a posteriori, which I mentioned this like the first day, but always a good refresher. So for the empiricist, empirical evidence, that type of thing, that's how the term kind of came to be. And rationalist, reason, use your brain for reason. That's kind of how those terms came to be. But David Hume was an empiricist, so we'll kind of get his side of the story next time. But Descartes was a rationalist. So that's why there's this huge emphasis on him putting away all of his thoughts and everything, and kind of trying to separate himself from the world around him in order to come to a firm foundation of what is true and what he believes. So he even starts by saying, "Today I have expressly rid my mind of all worries and arranged for myself a clear stretch of time. I am here quite alone, and at last I will devote myself sincerely and without reservation to the general demolition of my opinions." So this is like the armchair type of philosophy where you like really sit, close your eyes, and think for a long time. It's all about thought. He's not like going out and gathering evidence or anything like that. He is literally just trying to sit and think and reason into an answer of, can we know the external world? So there's multiple meditations. We're just reading meditation 1, but there's 6 meditations altogether. So he does a lot of work in the meditations. The first, or I should say, the goal of all of the meditations, the primary goal is to prove the most basic things. So he wants to have proof for why we believe anything. That things exist, that God exists, that you exist. that external bodies, like external material things like this marker exist. That's the goal of the meditations. The goal of the first meditation is a little different, because in order to get to the final goal, he must first destroy all of his beliefs. Sounds counterintuitive that to build up you tear down, but I think if we think about it like an old dilapidated house that's kind of falling apart, if you go in and you just try to like maybe the walls are kind of falling, and if you just try and like stick more boards to just try and prop up the walls, and then you kind of, I don't know, try and fix everything up using extra boards but not ever taking down the rotting boards, you're not going to have a good house. So he's thinking, okay, I don't have a firm foundation for my beliefs. I have to tear them all down. So he's trying to get rid of the rotting boards in this metaphorical house. So it's like if you watch HGTV, Demolition Day, they come in and they just like tear everything down with sledgehammers and things of that nature. And by the end of it, they have a clean slate to start from. They have a clean foundation. Hopefully the foundation isn't screwed up. And then they build from there. That's what he's doing with his thoughts. If he just started trying to fix up his thoughts, then he would never really build something worthwhile, because there would still be false assumptions in there, if that makes sense. So, yeah, my favorite way to think about it is a house that you got to take down the bad stuff so that you can build up the good stuff. So that's what he's doing with his mind. So the goal of meditation 1 is destruction, and he'll build up with the next meditations, but first he has to destroy all of the shaky beliefs. I love this meditation 1 because it's so extreme. He says, the general demolition of my opinions. Like, it's so extreme. But that's the goal, to just demolish all beliefs that he has. So this is in the next paragraph. I'm kind of just going to walk us through the reading to understand what's going on. So, in the first page, second paragraph, he says, reason now leads me to think that I should hold back my assent from opinions which are not completely certain and indubitable, just as carefully as I do from those which are patently false. So, for the purpose of rejecting all my opinions, it will be enough if I find in each of them at least some reason for doubt. So, once again, he's trying to destroy his beliefs. His criteria for this is that if there is at least some reason for him to doubt a belief, then that belief is gone. So he has 4 main arguments, which we'll get into, but in each of them, they cause doubt. And so he has to destroy those beliefs based on that. So he only needs some reason to doubt. He doesn't have to be 100% sure that something is false. All he has to be able to do is doubt. So he goes straight for the basic beliefs. And we'll just go through, he has 4 main arguments. The first one is sensory deception. So he has the thought, all right, most things that I know have come from my senses. So if you think about things that you know, probably the first few things that you think of are going to be things that came from experience or came from hearing, seeing, tasting, feeling, whatever the 5th sense is. So then he says that he's found that the senses deceive, and it is prudent never to trust completely those who have deceived us even once. So if he thinks of something like the senses that have deceived him at any point in time, then he can't trust them at all for this thought experiment, which is what this is. So he considers that if something is very far in the distance, it might look super small. So if you're in an airplane and you look down, you see like little tiny dots, and those are supposed to be houses, or they're supposed to be like plots of land. And if you're up close and personal with those, they look huge, maybe a mansion or something like that. But if you see it from an airplane, it looks really, really tiny. So in that case, your senses are deceiving you, because in the airplane, it looks really, really small, but you know that it's not really, really small. It's actually bigger than you. So that's a way that your senses can deceive you. You can think of thousands of examples. If we were doing actual class, then I would ask you to come up with examples. We would talk about it. So your eyes deceive you in that case. Your hearing can deceive you, especially right now with masks. It is really easy to see how hearing can be deceptive. Whenever I am taking orders at work, half the time I'm like, I have no idea what they're saying. I'm just gonna guess and hope that it's right. And I get people's names wrong all the time. It sucks. But sometimes I hear that someone's name was Lauren and they said Sarah or something like that. That's just another case of your senses deceiving you. There is phantom limb syndrome. So if someone is missing a limb, like say I am missing my forearm and below, sometimes people feel like an actual pain where that limb is supposed to be. That's your senses deceiving you. So anyways, we could do that all day, come up with ideas, but at least we have come up with some ways in which the senses deceive us. And that's all we have to do in order to reject it. So, we know that we can't completely trust the senses because they have deceived us at least once, and that's the criteria we're working under. So, let's see. So he acknowledges that an optical illusion or things far in the distance or something really small, that our senses can deceive us in that case. But he considers, what about the fact that he's sitting where he's sitting in front of a fire in his gown, which is kind of cute. An old man, he wasn't actually old, so maybe it's not cute. He's probably young at this point. So anyway, strike that. Sitting in a gown, holding a piece of paper, how can he deny that at least he knows that his hands and his body are his? So that is something, if we look at this like with each argument that he brings up, he is rejecting some way of knowing. So the first one is sensory. He's saying, okay, so I know that that's not true. But there are things that he can still trust after each argument until the last one. So after the first sensory deception argument, things that are not super small or not far away, it seems like you can trust that because there's no like optical illusion happening at that point. So the fact that I'm sitting in this chair right now, it still seems like I can't doubt that yet. So his next argument is going to tackle that. So first one is sensory deception. The second one is the madman argument. Which this one's interesting because it really doesn't do much for his overall argument. He considers, he uses the case of melancholia, which was a disease, it was probably something like mental illness, but at that point they considered it like there was a different understanding of mental illness at that point. So at that point, it was like a madman with some horrible disease. So imagine that I actually was just mad and my brain did not work right. And I maintained that I was a queen when I was actually a pauper, or that I was dressed in purple when I was not, or anything like that. So he considers that's something that you can doubt. But then instead of actually using this for his argument, he just says, but such people like that are insane, and I would be thought equally mad if I took anything from them as a model for myself. So he considers, what if I was a madman? And then he says, it's not even worth thinking about. So while he does bring it up and we consider it as an argument, it really doesn't do much. We don't make much progress there. We're kind of the same as we were with sensory deception. So the next one we get to is the dreaming argument. And we have two different cases. So 3, dreaming. The first one is occasional dreaming. So he considers sometimes he's sleeping and he's convinced, well, let's see, how does he say it? He says sometimes he's asleep and he's convinced that he's sitting in a chair in his gown, of course, by the fire, but actually he's laying in bed with his with not his gown. So then he wakes up real quick and he's like, oh, whoa, that wasn't true. That was just a dream. So sometimes we have these dreams. I'm sure you've had a dream at some point where it just seems so real, and then you wake up and you're like, whoa, where am I? I thought I was there and I'm not, and what's going on? So how do we know that we're not having it? How do I know I'm not just having a dream right now? There are never any sure signs of the distinction between dreaming and being awake that we can really point to. I mean, it does seem that real life is more vivid, but whenever you're in the dream, you're convinced that that's really vivid. So it's kind of hard to say. Then he moves on to the possibility of constant dreaming. So we know that we occasionally dream and think that we're somewhere where we're not, but what if we were constantly dreaming? Meaning our whole life was a dream. So kind of going back to what we considered at the beginning of class, what if just everything we've ever done has just been a dream and that nothing's actually real? His response to this is interesting because, I mean, you would think, okay, well, that would mean that we can't know anything, right? But he says that even though, like, most things don't seem to exist because of this, things like simple things that aren't composite, so they're not multiple things at once, simple truths we can still know even if we were constantly dreaming. So consider arithmetic. So 1 + 1 = 2, 2 + 2 = 4, 2 + 3 = 5. Whether I'm constantly dreaming or not has no effect on those sort of transcendent truths. So even though I can doubt most things, I still can't doubt general truths about the world, or general rational truths. They don't have to be necessarily about the external world. So we're almost doubting everything, but not quite yet, because we can't doubt geometry, I guess, and arithmetic. So mostly math things. Because he says, whether I'm awake or asleep, 2 and 3 added together are 5, and a square has no more than 4 sides. That's true no matter where you are in life. So things that he still has to doubt are simple truths, general truths about the world. So he needs another argument because he's trying to destroy all beliefs, remember. So we're not quite there yet. We're getting there, making progress. So now we get to the big argument. So first, this one is all just going to be under God/evil demon. So first he considers, he's Catholic, remember, he believes in God. Most people at the time believe in God. Firmly in his mind is the long-standing opinion that there's an omnipotent God who made the kind of creature that he is. He states, how do I know that he has not brought it about that there is no earth, no sky, no extended thing, no shape, no size, no place, while at the same time ensuring that all these things appear to me to exist just as they do now? So basically, how do I know that God, which he believes in, isn't up there making me have all of these experiences, but when they aren't actually true? Then he kind of quickly moves on to, God wouldn't have done this because we know God to be good. So he's starting with, he has an assumption about God that God must be good, or he's not God. And God must be powerful, or he's not God. So if God is good, then he wouldn't willfully deceive us, right? So then it kind of seems like, maybe we can't doubt things because if God exists, then he wouldn't deceive us, so we wouldn't be deceived into thinking that this world exists when it doesn't. But he considers something different. So he kind of moves on from God because, God's good, so God wouldn't do that. So we're moving on from God and we're considering this next one. This next argument, which is the evil demon. So, God wouldn't deceive us, but what if there was an all-powerful creature, I guess not creature, an all-powerful creator, omnipotent, not omnibenevolent, being that wanted to deceive us? What if that was the case? If that was the case, then the evil demon would allow us to be deceived at any given moment, and we can't really trust anything. So the evil demon would be okay with us thinking that we had all these experiences when we actually don't. And let's see. Yeah, so he says, I will suppose, therefore, that not God, who is supremely good and the source of truth, but rather some malicious demon of the utmost power and cunning has employed all his energies in order to deceive me. That's what we're considering. So this would cover even arithmetic truths. So 1 + 1 = 2. The evil demon could totally be deceiving us into thinking that when it actually equals 3, or when none of it exists anyways. So this is kind of the end-all argument. So how do we know that we are not being fooled by an evil, malicious demon that's all-powerful? Well, we don't really. That's kind of where he ends. He says, let's see. I happily slide back into my old opinions in dread, being shaken out of them for fear that my peaceful sleep may be followed by hard labor when I awake, and I shall have to toil not in the light but amid the inextricable darkness of the problems I have now raised. So basically, he's going to pretend like this isn't true so he can sleep. But when he wakes up, he has a lot of work to do. Because, let's see. If the evil demon is real, which he's supposing that it's real, meaning that he's capable of doubting everything, because he can imagine that an evil demon exists. If that were the case, then he could trust nothing. So he's able to doubt, with this argument, he's able to doubt everything. So that's how he ends the meditation. Just with, okay, I have now raised doubt to every belief that I hold. He does that by going for the foundation of his beliefs. So I won't leave you hanging. Well, first I should explain why this is important. So, before this, people hadn't really doubted that they could know anything. And Descartes uses this to build a foundation of knowledge. So it's counterintuitive, like I said, because he's destroying all his beliefs in order to have good beliefs. So, let's see. He, oh, sorry. I got distracted. So this is important because he's talking about how we know the external world. And at this point, he says that we can't know the external world. So at the end of the first meditation, Descartes is a skeptic. He does not end this way. So I want to make sure that we know this. So in the next meditation, let's see. In the second, where did I put all this? In the second meditation, he demonstrates that this is where the famous saying, "I think, therefore I am," comes in. He says, okay, the only thing that I'm capable of knowing right now, after he has doubted everything, is that he's doubting. So we just saw him doubt everything that exists, so he can't trust anything. But the one thing he can know is that he is doubting at that moment. So at that point, he is thinking. So that's where I think, therefore I am. I know that I'm thinking, therefore I know that I exist. That's kind of where he goes with that. So in the second meditation, he demonstrates that he exists, that God exists, and that material bodies exist. Then in the third meditation, it's more about objective reality, and that's kind of a technical term, but it's all because he's proving that we are capable of knowing the external world. So at the end of the first meditation, it sounds like he's proving we're not capable of knowing the external world, but through the meditations, his goal is to prove that we can know the external world, and that we can know that we exist, and we can know that God exists. Meditation 3 is about God. And if you're interested in that, it's a cosmological argument. So we've talked about that. We know what that is. So that's awesome. Okay, sorry. I had to take a quick break. So by the end of the meditations, Descartes has successfully, hopefully, according to himself, built a firm foundation for all of his beliefs. And the most basic of those is that he exists, that God exists, and that material, external things exist. If you're interested in Descartes, the meditations are pretty easy to read. The first meditation is pretty short, as we saw. So the others are not too different from that. A little bit longer, but yeah, it's good stuff. So once again, Descartes was a rationalist. So next week, next lecture, we're going to consider an empiricist and what he thinks about all of this. But that's basically it for today. If you have any questions about anything, let me know. I will be, I guess, let's see, what's today? We have a little over almost 2 weeks, I guess, for your, maybe a week and a half till your paper's due. So I hope that you are working on those. If you need help, just reach out and I will do it again. All right, see you later.